Hungarian Folk Tales. The Little Cockerel and the Hedge. Once upon a time, a little cockerel went out under the hedge to scratch around. He scratched and scratched around until the hedge was uprooted. Along came a magpie and asked the uprooted hedge, "Now what's the matter with you, hedge? Only yesterday you were standing here all healthy and strong." "Dear me, brother magpie," replied the hedge, "the little cockerel came out to scratch around under me, and now I'm uprooted." "Well then, I'll pull out my fine tail," said the magpie, and he pulled out his own tail feathers just like that. Off he flew to a walnut tree. The walnut tree was astonished at how scruffy the magpie looked. So the walnut tree asked, "What's happened to you, brother magpie? Only yesterday you had a fine tail, and now you are all scruffy." "Dear me, brother tree," answered the magpie, "the little cockerel went out to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, and I pulled out my fine tail." "Well then, I'll clip off my fine twigs," said the walnut tree, and he clipped off his twigs just like that. Around noon came a deer to rest under the walnut tree out of the great heat. She could see that the walnut tree was now completely bald. "What happened to you, walnut tree? Only yesterday you were green and flourishing. Now today you're all bald." "Dear me, sister dear," answered the walnut tree, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out its fine tail feather, and I clipped off all my twigs." "Well then, I'll chase away my two fine sons," said the deer, and she sent them both away just like that, for which she grieved and grieved. When she felt thirsty, she went to the well for a drink. Now the well was astonished to see the deer appear alone, because she always brought her two fine sons with her. So the well asked, "How is it you are on your own today, sister dear? Where have you left your two fine sons?" "Dear me, brother well," said the deer, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out its fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, and I sent my two fine sons away. Well then, I'll turn my fine wine into blood," said the well. And so he did. Now when Sarah, the serving girl, went to the well with her pail, she asked the well, "What's this, well? How is it today that you're full of blood instead of your sweet water?" "Dear me, Sarah," said the well, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her two fine sons away, and the water in me has turned to blood. Well then, I'll beat my own head with this pail." And so she did, and off she went with a swollen, battered head back to her mistress. Her mistress asked, "What happened to you, Sarah?" "Dear me, mistress," said Sarah, "the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her two fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, and I beat my own head with the pail. Well then, I'll spread my dough all over the wall." It was just ready for kneading, but she went ahead and spread it all over the wall. Now when the master of the house came home that evening, he saw that the dough was spread all over the wall. "Have you gone mad or what, dear wife, that you spread the dough all over the wall?" "Dear me, husband, the little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge was uprooted, the magpie pulled out his fine tail, the walnut tree clipped off all his twigs, the deer sent her two fine sons away, the water in the well turned to blood, Sarah beat her own head with a pail, and I spread the dough all over the wall. Well then, I'll shave off my fine beard." And he shaved it off just like that. Not long later, the son of the house came home and saw his father with a face like a plucked chicken. He asked, "What happened to you, father dear?" "Son, there's been nothing but trouble here all day. The little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted. The magpie pulled out his fine tail. The walnut tree clipped off all his twigs. The deer sent her 2 fine sons away. The water in the well turned to blood. Sarah beat her own head with a pail. Your mother spread the dough all over the wall. And I went and shaved off my fine beard. Fair enough, said the lad. I'll go out and cut off the legs of our 4 oxen. With that, he picked up his axe, went to the byre, and straight away cut off a foreleg of one of the oxen. He was just about to take the axe to another when a soldier just happened to arrive and cried to him, "Have you lost your mind, my lad? What are you doing to that ox?" "Dear me, soldier, sir." The little cockerel went out this morning to scratch around under the hedge. The hedge was uprooted. The magpie pulled out his fine tail. The walnut tree clipped off all his twigs. The deer sent her 2 fine sons away. The water in the well turned to blood. Sarah beat her own head with a pail. My mother spread the dough all over the wall. My father shaved off his fine beard completely. And now I'm cutting off the legs of our 4 oxen. "Only when the moon turns green," shouted the soldier, and gave the lad such a beating with the flat of his sword that it was all he could do to stagger back into the house. The soldier drove the oxen off to the fair and sold them. With his time served as a soldier, he was free to marry, and from the oxen prize he threw a great feast of a wedding, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. Wooden Peter. Once there lived a farmer and his wife. Now these good people didn't have any children, and so one day the farmer said to his wife, "I'm going off into the forest to carve as a child out of wood." Now his wife laughed at this, but the farmer bundled up his stuff and set off into the forest. There he met some wood carvers. "God blessings on you this day. I came to get a small piece of wood." So they chopped him a piece of wood and he started to carve himself a child. It was evening when he returned home, and his wife laughed when she saw he'd brought home a wooden child. They had their supper, and there was a little left over. "Now that's just enough for our son." Off they went to bed, and around midnight the boy called out, "Well, mother dear, are you sound asleep?" At that moment they woke up, and great was their surprise to see the wooden boy had come to life. They admired the boy until the break of day, and then the priest baptized him and named him Wooden Peter. When he came to be 3 days old, he asked if he could go out and find himself a friend to play with. "Hey, do you know if there's someone who makes swords in this town?" "Of course there is." So the boy went back into the house. "Father, please could you give me 8 florins? You can have whatever you need." "All I need is 8 florins." And off he went to the sword maker. "Good day to you, good sword maker. Let me have for 8 florins the sword that you first made. That's the one for me." So the sword maker went to the swords and sorted until he found an old rusty sword and a sheath to go with it. Peter took the sword, strapped it on, and it looked like the sword had been made especially for him. "Now, here's your 8 florins, for even your first sword has to be paid for." Next day there was a huge mob of people in the town. As they were moving towards the fair, they heard that there were 2 oxen tethered together with a golden chain. Whoever could cut the chain in 2 could take the oxen as his own. So Wooden Peter stepped up to say, "If you'll permit me, I'll cut the chain." So then Peter set to, and he cut that golden chain with a swish and a swoosh that could be heard across the country, far and near. Up went the tails of the 2 oxen, and they didn't stop trotting until they reached the stable. The owner of the oxen said, "Well, Wooden Peter, off with you home to feed the oxen, but you should know that all they eat is glowing embers." Peter set fire to 12 bundles of wood. When they were aflame, he took the water pail and filled it with glowing embers. The 2 oxen ate them all up, and one of them went off to where the sun rises, one to where the sun sets. So Peter said, "Now, Father, let me show you something." He tapped the corner of the gate with his fingers in 2 places, and from one of them, good wine gushed out, and from the other, good brandy. "Now, Father, everyone can drink to their heart's content. Do you see that wheelbarrow?" "I do indeed, son." "And that millstone?" "Yes, I see it." "Now, when the barrow stands in front of the door, and the millstone jumps into it of its own accord, the wine will turn to water, and the brandy to deep red blood, and then you'll know that I am dead. And then, if you want to find me, sit into that wheelbarrow, and I'll take you to where I am. Now, I have to go off to see the world and try my fortune." After that, Wooden Peter set off across 7 lands and 7 seas, until he came to a town in which there lived a king. "Good day to you, your good majesty." "Welcome you are. And what sort of journey are you on?" "I set off to be of service, to try my fortune." "And how much would you require for a year?" "Nothing at all, only what I eat and what I drink." So Peter stayed in the town, working as a carpenter. He was so clever with his hands that the old king took a liking to him. Now the king had a daughter who fell so in love with Wooden Peter that she thought she would die if she wasn't allowed to marry him. "Well then," said the king, "I won't have you dying on me, so I'll let you give him your hand and be his wife. I'll announce a great wedding feast, and you'll live as husband and wife." One day the king received a letter telling him to gather together everyone in the land to go off to fight in the war. When the king saw this, he began to weep. "Now, good Father Majesty, do not weep, for I'll go alone to the war." "My son, what can you do alone? You'll be like a gnat against a bison." But Wooden Peter went off, and he was wielding his sword so fiercely that he beat them one and all. But then he stumbled, and that's how they defeated him. As quickly as they could, they buried him in the ground. In the morning, as the light was dawning, the barrow went to the door. The millstone jumped into it of its own accord, the wine turned to water, and the brandy to deep red blood. So the farmer got into the barrow and went to where Peter had been cut down. He searched for him high and low, but to no avail. Then he saw the 2 oxen coming. The 2 oxen began to turn the soil with their horns until they uncovered Peter, but there was no sign of life in him. And so one ox put him back together again, and the other put his soul back into him. And Wooden Peter awoke. I slept so well." "You'd have slept forever if it hadn't been for us," said the oxen. They went home, and the king called the whole court together and crowned Wooden Peter king. And he and his queen lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. Pepper Pot Peter. Once upon a time, there lived a king who lived in doleful sorrow because he had a daughter who limped. His daughter wept and cried day and night because if someone came to court her, they up and left straight away. The king was afraid that his only daughter would spinster her life away, and so he sent the word across his kingdom that whoever could cure his daughter would live in wealth until the day he died. Now so many swarmed to the castle that the doorknob always had a hand on it, but the king's daughter still limped. Pepper Pot Peter also went to try his luck. They called him Pepper Pot Peter because he was really very little. So off went Peter and went on his way until he came upon a poor woman who was carrying a heavy load of wood. "Let me help you, old lady. I'll carry this," said Peter. And while the old woman was trying to thank him, he had already stacked the wood for her. "What brings you to this distant land?" asked the old woman just when Peter was bidding her farewell. "I'm off to cure the limping daughter of the king." "Well, fine it is that you met with me, because only I know what the cure is. But it's not easy to get hold of." "Well, tell me which way I have to go." "Listen carefully, son. On the summit of the glass mountain, there's a little lamb, and around its neck, there's a golden bell. If you can ring that bell 3 times under the girl's window, then you are sure to cure her. And how can I find my way there?" "Only with the magic horse of the king of the giants. And no one has ever been able to get it out of its stable." Pepper Pot Peter thanked her for her directions, and off he went without stopping until he came to the castle of the king of the giants. Under the gate was a hole, and through he went, straight to the stables. He tried to untie the magic horse. The horse let out such a whinny that the king of the giants fell out of his chair. For lest I forget, the king was at his dinner. Well then, off he ran straight to the table. Peter, in his great fear, turned into a flea and hid in the manger. When the king of the giants left, Peter climbed out again to untie the tether of the magic horse. Again the horse let out a whinny, this time so loud that the king hit his head against the wall, and off he ran to the stables without pause for thought. Once again he saw not a soul because Peter turned into a flea and hid in the manger. The king gave the horse a good whack. Why should it be whinnying when no one was hurting it? At his 3rd try, Peter managed to untie the horse. In vain it whinnied. The king didn't go to the stable. When Peter got through the castle gate with the magic horse, it whinnied so loudly that the walls of the 3 bastions trembled. The king came out in a rage and saw that his horse had been stolen. He jumped on the back of a tomcat and off he went after Peter. Peter was very pleased with the horse. The moment he set his spurs to it, the horse flew to the glass mountain. There he saw the little lamb with the golden bell dancing in the silken meadow. He went up to the lamb, but when he tried to take the bell off the lamb's neck, an angry little devil popped out of the ground. "I've been waiting for you, you good-for-nothing," he told Peter, shook him fiercely, and ordered him to make a barrel in the woods. When Peter had finished, the little devil went out and sat on the rim of the barrel and said, "Now I'm going to stuff you into the barrel, you thief." Peter saw that this was no joke and suddenly turned into a bee and stung the little so hard on the finger that it fell backwards into the barrel. Peter quickly put the lid onto the barrel, leaving a tiny hole so the little devil wouldn't suffocate. He took the bell off the lamb's neck, jumped onto the horse, and didn't stop until he got to the window of the limping daughter of the king. He rang the bell for the first time and saw that the bushes and trees started to dance. Then he rang the bell for the second time, And the court chamberlain and all the courtiers came out with the king himself, and everyone danced and sang. He rang the bell for the third time, and then the king's daughter opened the window. Pepper Pot Peter asked her to dance with him, and she didn't limp, not even a step. So joyful were they all that no one wanted to stop the revelry. "Well, my son, you have cured my daughter. Marry her and make her your wife for life." With that, he took the crown off his head and gave it to Peter, and he was just about to try it on when the king of the giants arrived on the back of the tomcat. You can imagine the panic. The king of the giants opened his mouth wide and swallowed down the whole court in one gulp. He didn't even hiccup. He only spat out the trees and the bricks the way that someone else spits out cherry stones. Peter, at the last moment, had jumped aside and hidden in the trouser pocket of the king of the giants. There he was safe and sound. The king himself was so full that he could hardly breathe, so he sat down on the ground. Pepper Pot Peter waited until he had fallen asleep. Then he climbed out of the pocket, called 1,000 spiders together, so that he couldn't move. Then Pepper Pot Peter somersaulted across the belly of the giant, and it burst straight away, and the people of the court were saved. 99 tailors sewed up the stomach of the king of the giants. By the time they had finished, the giant had slept it off. But he didn't have such a good time at Peter's wedding feast, for all he could eat was 3 oxen. A month and a day after the wedding, Peter took possession of the kingdom under the name of Pepper Pot Peter the First. And that's the end of my story.